We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of lands, waterways and skies across Australia. From Mulgana country in the west to Bundjalung country in the east, from Lutruwita in the south to Saibai Island in the Torres Strait, this continent is home to hundreds of different nations whose knowledge has helped shape and evolve our understanding of the land and seas. Today we pay respect to elders past and present and recognise the contribution of all First Nations peoples to the land we live, learn and play on. Have a deadly day.
Hello and welcome everyone. This is our fourth webinar in our mental health and wellbeing series, and I'm Lauren Bridge, the Executive Officer of the Alliance of Girls Schools Australasia. I think as anyone working in girls' schools knows, body dissatisfaction continues to be a real problem among women, adolescent and pre-adolescent girls. It's such a significant issue with really severe consequences. Just how girls feel about their bodies and appearance affects every other mental and physical health behaviour and outcome. Our co-presenters today, Dr. Jodie Forbes, Associate Dean of Wellbeing at Brisbane Girls Grammar School, and Dr. Zali Jaeger, Body Image, Mental Health and Wellbeing Expert, are going to walk us through the latest evidence on improving body image in adolescent girls. They'll discuss how body dissatisfaction affects girls and provide a summary of their evaluation of one school-based body image program. There's going to be time for questions after the presentation, and you can choose to either pop your questions into the Q&A during the presentation, or you can ask your questions live at the end by using the raise hand button, and we'll bring you into the conversation. And so let me warmly welcome Jodie and Zali to the screen.
Thanks, Lauren. It's lovely to be talking about this really important topic to the Alliance of Girls Schools. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and get started. Can everyone see that? Zali, can you see that? Okay, excellent. So as you're all aware, Zali and I are going to talk about the latest evidence on improving body image in adolescent girls. We're also going to touch on part of the research project that we did that involved mothers, and talk about what we why we need to act now. There we go. Sorry. So just what we're going to do for the webinar is, firstly, Zali's going to talk about body image and just put it in context for us, and talk about some of the research to lay the groundwork. I'm then going to take you through the research project that we did over a number of years and highlight some of the key findings before handing back over to Zali, who's going to talk more about future directions and some of the more contemporary resources that are available, and in particular, Embrace Kids, which it's quite timely that has recently been launched, and Zali's been a part of that. So it's great that we have an opportunity to touch on that. So Zali, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jodie. So I've been doing this research for a long time now, and I have a health and physical education background. So my whole purpose for doing a lot of this research in body image was that I really wanted to figure out what the programs could be that would be effective for young people that we could embed into the school context in order to improve their body image. And I started out on this journey about 18 or 20 years ago, trying to figure out what the programs would be and how we could best support teachers to do this work. And so it's very exciting to be able to come here and sort of talk about this whole journey of what we've learned in the research field over that 20 years, and in particularly in relation to Jodie's project as well, which makes some really important contributions. But we'll start by talking a little bit about the problem. We're not going to get too deep into the problem, because I think if we do, we would get very despondent and upset. What we know is that young people experience body image concerns pretty universally, and that, you know, some of the latest data shows around 77% of young Australians agree or say yes, that they're experiencing body image distress. And so when we're talking about body image, we're talking about the thoughts and feelings that we have about our bodies. It's not actually what people look like. Two people can look exactly the same and have very different thoughts and feelings about their bodies, and you can't tell how someone feels about their body just by looking at them. So we know that young people have say that this is a problem every year in the Mission Australia survey. Whenever they do that survey, body image has come out in the top 3 issues of personal concern over the past 10 years or so. And every time that happens, we sort of go, oh, yes, this is still a problem, because, you know, that kind of supports our work. But we're also like, why is this still a problem? Because it's something that we have been hoping to address over time as well. We know that some of the new research that's coming out is really showing the connection with depression. And there were sort of several really high quality studies that came out in the last 2 years showing that young people who are dissatisfied with their bodies are much more likely to go on to develop depression. And in this Australian study, it was 24 times more likely to experience depression. And so I like to talk about this a little bit, because some people think that body image is this kind of frivolous thing, or a kind of, you know, surface level thing. It's often associated with teenage girls, like, oh, it's just something that they worried about, and then they grow out of it and it's all fine. But actually, it's really serious. And actually, having concerns about your body does mean that you're more likely to develop, you know, these sort of mental health concerns. But also, we know that people who are dissatisfied with their bodies are much less likely, oh, thanks, Jane. Much less likely to engage in the positive health behaviours, and much more likely to do the sorts of things that we know are not so good for them. So people, and this is particularly the research relating to young people who are dissatisfied with their bodies, you know, are more likely to engage in disordered eating behaviours and to use steroids and weight gain supplements. And that kind of research has been around for a long time. And those sorts of things are kind of a little bit more obvious. There's a bit of a misconception that people think that if you are relaxed about your body, or if you appreciate your body, that you might just end up doing sort of whatever you want, and then as a result gaining weight. That's a huge misconception that we have to work to overcome a lot of the time. And a lot of the data now is showing that actually those who are dissatisfied with their bodies are more likely to gain weight over time. And so if sort of weight gain is an important sort of thing to you, or to, you know, in that data kind of space, for the people that do that sort of research, we want to kind of get out of that misconception and understand that actually making people feel bad about their bodies and about their weight does not help them to maintain a certain body size, shape, or weight. So body dissatisfaction is also really linked to the use of other drugs, alcohol, smoking, things like age of first sexual intercourse, and engagement in self-harm. And so the young people who are dissatisfied are more likely to engage in that whole range of risky sort of behaviours, or behaviours in that risk profile, that then lead to obviously other physical and mental health outcomes. And finally, down the bottom, there's been not a lot of research, but a little bit to show that young people who are dissatisfied with their bodies are less likely to engage academically. And so in one study that was sort of measured by young people saying qualitatively that they were much less likely to put their hand up and answer a question, or put themselves forward in a classroom or leadership, school leadership situation, if they weren't feeling confident about their bodies. And there's some other research about school attendance and engagement as well. So we know that it's a problem. When I am talking about body image, I kind of use the range of terms just to keep it a little bit different. But in general, there's sort of, you know, the positive kind of space. And I like to talk about body appreciation there. So this is when young people sort of accept and hold favourable opinions towards their body. They respect their body, trust it, nourish it, and listen to their bodies. and reject some of the media promoted kind of appearance ideals or beauty ideals as the only form of human beauty. And so I think that like body positivity is sort of something that I hear people talking about, but it's something that can mean very different things in very different settings. And if you type it into Instagram, you just get a whole bunch of people wearing bikinis. And maybe they are confident about their bodies, but I tend to use body appreciation because it just implies that kind of deeper connection, and that it is something that is a mindset. When we're talking about body dissatisfaction, that's sort of feeling that shame around the body, disliking specific parts. And I've got the spiral there just to kind of think about the way that we do kind of spiral down or spiral up into these different places. We know that body image changes constantly. It's very dynamic throughout the day, depending on our interactions with others and depending on some of the feedback that we're receiving and how we sort of feel physically on any certain day. But what tends to happen is that if we sort of start to spiral into thinking, maybe you might make some social comparisons against someone else and then start to sort of notice parts of your body, and then that spirals down, and the self-critical kind of response really then powers that spiral that can just go deeper and deeper. And what we want to see is adolescents, even if they do start going on that downward spiral, that they're able to then utilize strategies to bring themselves back up again. This little graph is just showing across the age spectrum of sort of school-aged years, I guess, that body esteem, or sort of that body appreciative kind of space, the positive feelings about the body decrease throughout childhood and adolescence. And although this is people assume that this is a problem for girls, we know that boys are generally just as dissatisfied. We've been pretty bad at capturing that in some of the measures, but they are just as dissatisfied. They just express it in different ways. What we see is the gender differences tend to emerge at around the age of sort of 8 or 9, and there's a few reasons for this. That's the age at which young people develop the ability to compare themselves to others. And so they tend to compare on a whole range of different things, but mostly around their bodies and what they look like. And then we also tend to see the concept of egocentrism, or that idea that everyone is looking at them. It's like them being on their own reality TV show, which is a common sort of state in adolescence, but that tends to drive that being self-conscious about their body and their appearance as well during this time. So we see girls tend to go down pretty rapidly towards adolescence, and then they stay sort of pretty low throughout their adolescent years. We do tend to see that kind of go up a little bit at 24, but then it stays at a plateau until about the age of 65. And so what we see is that actually we get better at, maybe having other things on which to base our identity and our good feelings about ourselves, but the body dissatisfaction is still there, or, that lower level of body appreciation is still there right throughout, for women, right throughout our adult life. And this is sort of important as we come to some of the talk about mothers as well, because once you leave school, there's basically no programs or support or resources to help you improve your body image. For boys, it tends to go back up, and then they sit at a kind of higher level with different kind of fluctuations throughout midlife, but just not experiencing that negative state so badly. In terms of the influences on body image, we tend to think through the biopsychosocial model. And so that kind of states that there are some biological influences like your genetics that determine both your body size, but also some of the psychological traits. BMI is one of the highest predictors of body dissatisfaction, in that people in larger bodies tend to have more body dissatisfaction due to the societal kind of stigmas around that. Gender is a biological influence, in that typically cisgender females would experience more dissatisfaction than cis males. Pubertal timing is a really interesting one, because what we find is that the boys who mature earlier tend to have a better time in terms of their body image, whereas the girls who mature earlier tend to experience, tend to have a worse time, or they have more dissatisfaction. So that's something to consider in that adolescent space as well. The psychological influences are the things that make up how we think and how we feel and how those things interact with each other. Things like perfectionism, anxiety, depression, internalization of the thin ideal, the level at which people make comparisons with others, because that does differ among across the population. So those sorts of psychological influences are there at that individual level. And then we have the sociocultural influences, which are mostly peers, family, and the media. So all of the people around us, their attitudes, how they engage with us and interact with each other to create that sort of environment that surrounds us. And now that we have sort of social media, that's considered both like a peer influence and a media influence, because it's like the imagery that we see as well as the commentary that we have from our peers. And so when we think about those influences, why I like to talk about those is because those are the sorts of things that influence on body image, but they're also the things that we can create change in terms of the school environment in order to try and improve things. And so typically would think about implementing sort of curriculum programs that might provide resources or resilience for individuals at that psychological level, trying to reduce the amount of social comparisons, reduce the amount of conversations, or reduce some of the internalization of the thin ideal. And then to try and make change at that sociocultural level. So to change the way that peers might interact with each other, that's around conversations as well, and social comparisons, and to change the family influence, which is where the sort of mothers thing comes in, and to create change in terms of how people engage with the media. And so that's going to lead on to the next slide, Jodie, thank you. We were talking about effective body image programs. And so we did a systematic review almost 20 years ago now, 10 years ago, not that long. We did a systematic review 10 years ago that looked at the past 20 years of research and looked at all of the different programs that had been done, which ones had been effective, and what sort of features or practical components of those programs might have made them effective, as well as the approaches that they had taken. And we found that generally, and this was just in terms of classroom-based programs, generally they were interactive. A lot of the time when researchers who are psychologists develop programs, maybe they had not thought about interactivity and just did a lot of lectures in when we're thinking about the early 2000s programs. But we found that they had to be interactive, they had to be multi-session with an average of around 5 hours in terms of the total dose, if you like, of the programs. In terms of approach, the media literacy, self-esteem and peer-focused content was more effective, and not the psychoeducation about eating disorders. So anything that sort of touched on what the signs and symptoms of eating disorders were was typically not helpful in improving body image. And in general, the programs are more effective for younger audiences. So once for the programs that were sort of aiming at the 14, 15, 16-year-olds, which is where the problems were starting to really emerge, the average age of onset of an eating disorder is 14.9 years. When the programs were targeting at that level, they tended to be not as effective because all of the attitudes had already been sort of cemented, and there was less capacity for change. Whereas the ones for 12 and 13-year-olds tended to have more change. And when we're talking about etiological base, that's really thinking through the risk factors, but also the environment that surrounds young people. What's next, Jodie? Are we moving on to your study?
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Zali. So I'm going to talk about the research that Zali and I did. And initially the project came from a pragmatic perspective, and that was because I'd worked in the school that I work in for about 10 years, and I really wanted to understand what would work to improve the body image of adolescent girls in attending an independent girls' school in Queensland. And I'd been thinking of doing research for quite a few years. And in 2015, I met Zali and was fortunate that she agreed to supervise me during a research degree. So the project actually went for 7 years, which I was not counting on when I first signed up for it, but 7 years later, it actually progressed to incorporate both a practical and a theoretical perspective, and it expanded to actually include 2 studies. And in those studies, particularly the second study, it extended from a focus on students, particularly Year 8 students, to also focus on mothers. So I'm going to just provide a brief summary of the research and identify some of the key findings and highlight what we learned. And then Zali will talk about future directions and in particular some more contemporary resources. So the study one, really we wanted to evaluate one of the classroom-based body image interventions, and we selected a program called Dove Confident Me, and I'll expand on that a little bit more later. We did the program with Year 8 students. It was delivered by teachers, and we took some outcome measures, both pre, immediately post, and then a 3-month follow-up, and did a linear mixed model analysis on the data. We had about 400 students all up for the project, 200 in the intervention group and 200 in the control group. And the reason we chose to evaluate Dove Confident Me, well, there was several reasons. Firstly, it had recently been developed, and that was following a collaboration between body image researchers and the Dove company. And at that time, a systematic review, the one that Zali mentioned, the 2013 review of classroom-based interventions, they identified a program called Happy Being Me, which was developed by Australian researchers. And at that time, that was suggested to be the most promising program for girls. So the researchers working with the Dove company took Happy Being Me and they remodeled it. So they expanded it from 3 sessions to 5 sessions. They added content that was relevant for boys because it was developed to be a program for a co-educational audience. And they made it freely available on the Dove website. So it was intended for global dissemination. And there have been quite a few calls for researchers to conduct independent replications of pre-existing programs rather than keep developing new ones, and to do these replications in diverse conditions. So I was really interested because up until that time, Dove Confident Me hadn't been evaluated outside of the UK. It hadn't been evaluated with a girls-only audience. And also there was only some studies that had evaluated it with teacher delivery. A lot of the previous research, particularly with Happy Being Me, was delivered by researchers. So we really thought that choosing this program to evaluate would be an important sort of contribution. So Dove Confident Me, as I said, it's available on the Dove website. It's had a few updates since the versions that I used. There's a manual for teachers and then a presentation, embedded videos and some handouts. And it's actually a program that is etologically based. And so that was what Zali was talking about before, in that it means it aims to reduce the known risk factors for developing body dissatisfaction. And when we look at the socio-cultural impacts, we talk about parents, peers, and the media. And the main sort of mediating factors that come out of that are internalization of the appearance ideal or the thin ideal. And so that's one of the topics in the Dove program. Obviously media and how it affects people. And then comparison or appearance-based comparison. So that's one of the other big ones. And then along with appearance-based talk and appearance-based teasing. So those are embedded in the 5 sessions of the Dove Confident Me. So we delivered this in 2016 during term 4. We had teachers attended 2 hours of training that we provided for them, and we gave them a manual, and then the lessons were scheduled into our sort of pastoral care program. So obviously for outcomes, we were looking at the known risk factors and hoping that we would see a significant reduction in these alongside a significant increase in self-esteem and body esteem. We used all standardised measures, and they had been used in previous research. And while the results revealed significant changes in the outcomes, we actually saw that they occurred across both groups, both the intervention and the control group. So it didn't support our hypothesis so much that it was due to the intervention that effectively improved body image or reduced the eating disorder risk factors. And improvements like this in both the intervention and control group are not uncommon, and nor are limited findings for a universal prevention study. So this was for all Year 8 students. It wasn't for Year 8 students who already had reported body dissatisfaction or anybody who had been measured to have certain risk factors. So those sorts of universal prevention studies with only a 3-month follow-up, they don't often have fantastic outcomes, but it was still quite disappointing. But the student and the teacher feedback did offer some insight and understanding. So we firstly did an acceptability rating with students and asked them, did they enjoy the lessons? Did they feel comfortable? How important they were? And most of the students, or over half, said that they felt the lessons were important, were well taught, and they felt comfortable. But about 60% said they didn't actually enjoy the program and didn't find it helpful. And then when we dug down into the comments that we offered, or we asked the students to provide, we noticed that close to 30% of comments that were made described the program as boring or repetitive. However, just over 20% said that they thought the experience was fun, relaxing and safe. And about 17% described feeling uncomfortable about discussing body image, and they thought it wasn't a great experience. Some of the themes that came out is that we discovered that the girls tend to enjoy the videos, and they also like the opportunity to have class discussion, and they preferred this to doing the worksheets. And interestingly, the relationship with the teacher emerged as a really important theme, and it was quite polarizing. It was either the thing that the girls liked the most about the program or liked the least. And we recognized that we had a bit of a flaw in our design, because due to timetable issues, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, we had classes that were being taught by teachers that were not known to each other. So the girls that were being taught by teachers that they knew said that they actually enjoyed it, but girls that were being taught by teachers that hadn't actually taught that class or those students before tended to find it more difficult to engage in the program. And teacher feedback was really in regards to the manual and the resources. They said that the manual was a bit too complex. It was difficult to get all the information into the lesson. They too noticed that it wasn't as engaging as it could have been, and that it was a little bit repetitive. And also teachers themselves also identified that if they had known the students that they were teaching, that would have made a better experience. So given the findings and the feedback that we were able to collect, we decided to do a second replication, but this time to modify the program. And so we changed a bit of the fonts, we sourced Australian videos, and we replaced the worksheets to have more classroom discussion. We also rectified the flaw, and we had teachers teaching students that they'd had over a 12-month relationship with. We moved it from term 4 to term 2 because we thought that the girls were a little bit too old in term 4, and some teachers thought that they were a little bit too restless. So we brought it into term 2 just so that they were that little bit younger. And we conducted the same sort of analysis, but the sample size was about 600 this time, so it was a bigger study. Again, we measured mostly the same outcomes using the same instruments. However, like study 1, the outcomes revealed changes in the directions that we wanted, but again, didn't reach significance. However, what we did discover was that the acceptability ratings for study 2 were significantly higher than study 1. And so students were saying that they enjoyed the program more, they thought that it was helpful and taught well more than they thought in the first study. And this slide just shows you everything apart from how comfortable did you feel improved in study 2 compared to study 1. Less students described it as boring and repetitive, but also less students said it was fun and relaxing. And more students did say that they felt uncomfortable, or there were more comments saying that. So the themes that came out from that feedback is that students really enjoyed the opportunity to share their thoughts with their peers and engage in those discussions. And whilst that was engaging, it also had the risk of some of those discussions going off on tangents and not being as contained or sticking to the program sort of fidelity or content. Some of the students said that they felt that the program or the teachers were making inaccurate assumptions, and they suggested that perhaps a focus on body positivity and using their peers might have been helpful. Despite having some of that feedback, there was no evidence that the intervention resulted in any harm, but it did actually help us to start to think about perhaps interventions coming from a more positive approach may be more ideal than the deliberate teaching to students of how to reduce the risk factors. So in summary, what we learned from that study, or both studies, is that wellbeing programs, particularly body image programs, are likely to be more effective for girls when teachers feel confident with the program content. So in the second study, that had been the third time that our teachers had delivered this program, and so they were actually feeling much more confident with it. We know that it's more engaging if teachers have a good relationship with the class, and that girls are comprised in classes where they feel comfortable as well, particularly if there's going to be discussion. And again, they like more discussion and less worksheets. And so we sort of, again, started to think about perhaps a focus on the health promotion or the protective factors might actually be a way forward as opposed to focusing on the risk factors. Zali's going to talk about that more in a moment, but before I move on to her, I just want to briefly outline the second part of study 2, which was an intervention for the mothers. And really that was to look at investigating the benefits of extending classroom-based programs to parents. And since the 1990s, there has been calls for parents to be more involved in body image and eating disorder prevention programs. And it's actually, progress has been quite limited. And it's been notoriously difficult to engage parents in these sorts of programs. So we sought to determine whether there would be benefit in developing a complementary program and how it would go. So we devised a program called Raising Confident Girls, and it was a 3-session program delivered only to mothers. We know that mothers play a really important role in the shaping of attitudes and behaviours for a daughter. And so given they're one of the most dominant influences on their daughter's development of body dissatisfaction, we sort of thought, well, so too are they a key preventative resource. So we really targeted them. But the aim of Raising Confident Girls was twofold. So we really wanted to help mothers learn information and education and to have a positive impact on their daughters. But then we also wanted to improve their own body image as well. So we had, the program was delivered at the same time as the classroom-based program in the same term, but it was delivered in the evenings from about 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And it was 3 sessions across 3 fortnights. We had 70 mothers attend the program, and we had another 50 mothers act as a control group so that we could run some measures. So similar to the Dove Confident Me, we wanted Raising Confident Girls to have an etiological base so that we focused on some of the risk factors. But we also wanted to include content that focused on promoting body appreciation. And we also, in line with recommendations as to how to engage parents in these sorts of programs, we embedded the content into a more general parenting program. So we had information about mother-daughter relationships, parenting style, adolescent development, formation of identity. And we also then included some of the resources in regards to self-compassion for the mothers and how they could care for themselves. So there was a number of different resources that we incorporated into it. Just briefly, the 3 sessions, the first session was called Embrace, and it began with a viewing of the Embrace documentary, which was relatively new at the time. And the aim was to provide some thought-provoking education for parents, but also the research that Zali's done with that program showed that it was quite emotive. So we wanted the mothers to sort of bond together, because some of the content that we were going to ask them to do was somewhat confronting because it was about themselves. So we did that at first. And then the second session was Educate. We used the same sort of information that the students were learning from Confident Me, but we also used another resource that's available from Dove called Uniquely Me, and that's targeted at parents and to help them understand how to help their children's body image. And the final session was really focusing more on parenting, role modeling, relationships, and things like that. We also had the mothers do a few exercises from one of the resources called the Body Project, which is a cognitive dissonance-based program that has got a lot of good evidence. So we actually found with the outcomes in line with our hypothesis, the mothers who attended Raising Confident Girls actually had significant improvements in their levels of body esteem, their levels of body appreciation. They also had significantly greater parenting knowledge, parenting skills and confidence, and as positive role models. And the ones with the red asterisks were able to be maintained to the 3-month follow-up. So it was really quite exciting because it suggested that this program was one of the first face-to-face school-based interventions for a large group of mothers to demonstrate that it had a significant improvement on their own body image. The acceptability ratings were really positive and quite high. Over 90% of the participants felt that the program was important and helpful and well organised. And just going back to those findings, you'll notice that although the body satisfaction and body esteem improved, there was still no reduction in those risk factors. And that suggested that those mothers, it was possible for them to improve their body esteem and their body appreciation while continuing to perhaps engage in social comparison or appearance-based talk. And that sort of, we thought, may lend support to the idea that you can focus on body positivity and build protective factors, as well as perhaps trying to reduce those risk factors, and certainly for that age group as well. So what we learned then in regards to just engaging parents, not just in the Raising Confident Girls, but actually in parents, is really that programs work better if it's tailored to meet the specific needs of the parent group. So we worked really hard, and I've been at the school for 10 or 15 years. So we worked really hard to tailor the PAC program to what our Year 8 mothers were looking for. It worked well to embed body image content into a general parenting program, and also highlighted the importance of researchers and school personnel collaborating together. So it really highlighted the fact that while researchers are experts in their content and their programs and their interventions, school personnel are experts regarding their community. They're experts regarding their students, they're experts regarding their parent body and what what they want, and the sort of experience they want. And so it really highlighted the importance of collaborating more. And again, as I said, focusing on promoting body positivity. And so Zali's now going to focus on that and take that into the next direction. So I'll hand over to you, Zali.
Thank you. And it's so nice to hear it, that whole 7-year journey summarized, so cleanly there. And I guess that's why we share this, is so that you don't have to go on your own 7-year journey to find out some of these things, but we can, learn from each other. And even though what we did find was that the Dove Confident Me program wasn't so effective when sort of brought back to that girls only independent school context among Year 8 students, I still think there could be scope for that program to be implemented in Year 7. And there's sort of, a range of other sort of changes that we could make as well. But kind of over this journey of that amount of time, what we learned as well is that, maybe we don't have to teach about the risk factors. We don't have to teach about making social comparisons, or we don't have to teach about avoiding body talk in order to improve body image. And maybe instead we could take some of these, what I'm calling like a broad spectrum approach. It's almost like applying sunscreen, where we can do some of these things where the evidence has shown that they can improve body image, but the evidence is also showing that they can improve a whole range of mental health outcomes. And so we don't necessarily need to focus on and teach about body image in order to improve it, particularly at this age of like sort of 11 to 13 years. And so some of the things that are coming out of the literature is that there are so many benefits of self-compassion. And there's now sort of a really solid research space around self-compassion. It's not just #BeKind and just beating yourself up about needing to be kinder to yourself. There's kind of a whole process behind it, and some really nice mindful meditations to practice turning down the self-criticism and turning up that compassionate voice. And they've shown that, that can be really helpful for body image. And I just think that it helps to interrupt that spiral down, because it gives young people a strategy to sort of, and we've developed sort of like a traffic light resource where it's like, stop and feel the feelings, realize that you're not the only one, and then say something kind to yourself. But also the value of sort of that supportive touch is really helpful. And so we think there's huge promise for self-compassion interventions, particularly in the school setting. And my colleague at Griffith, Vayasekas, has done some early work in that space, and that's kind of where we're moving to now. The other thing that's showing some promise is appreciation of body functionality. And so the current sort of format for this is doing writing tasks, where we sort of encourage people to think about the wide range of things that their body does for them, more than just, looking a certain way. And we know now that when we can encourage people to really think about what their body does, it makes them worry a lot less about how they look. And that kind of relates to self-objectification theory. And so we've got some writing tasks that we're sort of adapting for adolescents in order to think about just valuing the, what their body does in terms of their 5 senses, and in terms of their, their ability to run and jump, yes, but also their ability to creatively express themselves and to interact with others, and all of these things, healing when you're sick and protecting you from COVID, and all of the things that your body does without you even thinking about it, like regulating your temperature. We also know that there are some things like addressing particularly appearance-based teasing and body shaming that would be very beneficial for body image and wouldn't actually involve teaching about body image. So in general, in that space, what we're recommending, and we've been recommending for a long time, that we take sort of a health promoting schools approach, where we would focus, yes, on classroom interventions, but then also changing the parents and the sort of community around that, enhancing teacher and other school personnel capacity, and working on sort of the policy and the social as well as the physical environment of a school. In terms of the key messages, though, given that, I'm aware that we've just told you that one program didn't really work very well and that, the others are still coming. And I'm very aware that some people have to teach year 8 next week, regardless of whether or not we're ready with a new evidence-based program. So the 4 key things that we're sort of bringing together is to celebrate the diversity of body size and shape. There's a lot of research showing that if we look at images of people who are in sort of regular average size bodies, the Australian average size is 14 to 16. And if people see clothing and Instagram models and general imagery of people that are more in that size range instead of, the 6 to 8, then they will have a more positive body image. Coming back to self-compassion again, and there are a lot of resources available, and Kristen Neff is kind of the leader in that space. The focus on functionality, and we can just do that by talking about what our bodies can do instead of what they look like, and reframing any sort of commentary or talk that comes up about, what someone looks like, to being like, yeah, but what does their body do? And so the last one should be recognizing real role models. It's repeated there, but that's really thinking about valuing people for who they are and what they're doing rather than just what they look like. And that's something that we can do with young people, particularly around who they're looking at on social media. There are still a few things that I definitely recommend we avoid. And this has sort of been shown through the last many years of research, but we really don't want to be weighing students in class or in sport. And in most cases, that's not happening anymore, but in some cases we do still hear of it happening. So needing to state that. We don't want to be calculating BMI or caloric intake. All of those things might be an interesting maths exercise, but they're not very good in terms of triggering eating disorders. Fitness testing is something that we've starting to get a little bit of research around, that it does in particular make young people concerned about their social self-esteem, and they're comparing themselves with others. So if that can be avoided, or if we can do that in different kind of ways to make it less competitive on a whole class level, then that's something that we would be recommending. The teaching of nutrition is potentially quite problematic for body image and eating disorders. So we're recommending that we avoid food diaries or any sort of like recording of food intake across the week, because that's kind of a disordered behavior. Showing images of idealized bodies is not recommended. I have seen in the past a lot of sort of teachers teaching about body image, and then the images that they're showing are of people who have eating disorders. And we know that from years of research that when we sit people down and we show them images of people who are thin, then it makes them feel worse about their own bodies and also makes them depressed, like their mood goes down. So we don't want to be showing images of sort of these like socially acceptable or idealized bodies as we're trying to teach about this topic. They see enough of those on Instagram and other platforms anyway. We don't want to be giving details of behaviours to change weight or shape, or encouraging that anyone would need to change their diet or physical activity behaviours in relation to weight and shape. We actually want to avoid mentioning weight and size if we can altogether, but I appreciate that that can be difficult sometimes. The other 2 things is to avoid magazine collages, which still comes up as a common kind of teaching strategy because of the amount of exposure that they would get to those images. And finally, I do find that a lot of people try to teach about this topic by bringing in a guest speaker, and that's fine. The Butterfly Foundation does have some excellent talks, but we recommend that that guest speaker is not someone who has recovered from an eating disorder who's going to talk through their story, because the research shows that that could be problematic as well. So in terms of the new directions, the Embrace Hub is something that only was launched last week, actually. And this website is a collaboration between the Body Confident Collective, which is my research translation organisation, and the Body Image Movement, which is led by Taran Bomfett, who was the director of the first Embrace film and has subsequently made another film for children. So this hub is live at the moment, and that's where I'm just sending everyone, because it's like, that's where we've put all of the things. So all of the resources for parents and for teachers and for young people as well, that have been drawn from kind of the latest evidence in this space, we've put them on the Embrace Hub for free. And so on that site, there are developmentally appropriate resources for young people according to whether they're 9 to 12 years or 13 plus, and we can just go into a bit more detail with the 13 plus. We've also just written a book that came out a few weeks ago, and this was designed as a book for parents in order to support them when they went along to see the Embrace Kids film with their children. But the first part of this book focuses on parents or on adults, and it's actually, I just want everyone to know to read it, because that's where I've just written down everything that adults need to know if they are working with young people. And so I think that this is something that even if you're a teacher without children, then I think that this would be relevant for you, not just because I wrote it. The final thing is the Embrace Kids film. This is coming out in cinemas on the 1st of September, and it was designed to be something that young people would go to see with their parents or carers. It's recommended for kids aged 9 to 14, but the advice around the 9-year-old part is sort of like, if they're starting to realize that this is an issue, then that's exactly the sort of 9-year-old that should go. If they're a 9-year-old who has no idea, then maybe wait a little while before they see the film. If you want to have a look, I've written a theoretical rationale for the film, because I advised on the content as they were creating it. And so it brings together all of that research knowledge, and I've written a theoretical rationale on why it should be helpful, but we're in the process of doing the research right now. We don't have the outcomes at the moment. And so if you want to get involved with the film, all of these details are on the Embrace Hub website, but there are opportunities to host a screening of Embrace Kids. If you can host that at a cinema at the moment, you can host that at a school from November onwards. And then we're developing some classroom resources that will be launched in 2023. So pop your email on the Embrace Hub website if you want to be the first to receive those resources. Taran and I are also available to work with schools that are really committed to this issue and who want to sort of engage on a deeper level with teacher professional development and courses, and looking at this, at taking this whole school approach to their school, to addressing body image in their school. So I think we've got some time for questions, and I'm very excited to hear what people have to say.
Hi, Zali. Thanks for that. And Jody, that was great. We do have a couple of questions. I don't know if you can see them there in the Q&A, or if anyone wants to raise their hand. Are you able to see them?
Yep.
Zali, or do you want me to read them out to you?
Yeah, I can see them. I'll just address this one first because it's a quick one. In terms of from Emma, curious about avoidance of guest speaker who has recovered from an eating disorder. We have Butterfly Foundation, but these speakers are often lived experience speakers. Guessing this is okay as they're coming from a research base. The Butterfly Foundation does a great job of preparing their guest speakers who have a lived experience in order to be able to talk about that safely. So that is fine. It's more other guest speakers who might be approaching the school to talk through, who have not gone through that Butterfly Foundation training, that I would recommend avoiding. Let's have a look. Is it okay to talk about diet from the point of view of maintaining health as opposed to size and shape? In terms of food, we really would like to be encouraging intuitive eating, and that is about listening to the body in terms of what it wants to eat, as well as listening to those internal signals of hunger and fullness. I think diet is just a tricky word because some people hear it and think about weight control, whereas other people hear it and think that represents what you're actually eating. And so I think that, yeah, it's okay to talk about what we're eating from a point of view of health. It does have to be kind of realistic, though. What I'm hearing from a lot of young people is that when they go to their nutrition lessons, it feels judgmental in terms of what they're eating, and it sounds to them like what they're taught is that they could never have chocolate or biscuits, and that there's this like very clear focus on health that makes them a little uncomfortable because it doesn't feel realistic. Feel free to jump.
Yeah, we might have to, there's nobody putting their hand up, but we might have to move along with those questions just so that we can finish on time. I'm just conscious of people needing to get to other commitments. So there's another question there from Karen about resources seem to be aimed at younger high school kids. Are these resources available for older students, e.g. year 10 plus?
Yeah, we have some coming for older high school students. And yeah, that's a program from the US called Be Real that's just been implemented over there, and it's coming here. There are Butterfly Foundation talks and resources for grade 10, and what do they call it? Body Kind Schools Week is coming up. So that resource is for all ages.
There's another question there, Zali, about Embrace Kids in New Zealand. Do you know when?
Yeah, it will be going to New Zealand, but I'm just not sure about screening dates. But I did ask, and it is going to be going there too, and I'm quite keen to go to New Zealand. So.
We've also got another question here that's not on the Q&A, but the Embrace Hub address. Do you have that, Sally? Do you want to pop that?
Yeah.
Or if you give it to us later, we'll send it out to everyone.
Oh yeah, it's just theembracehub.com.
And a couple of other questions there from Amy. I was a bit unsure regarding what you said at the start about increased weight and the misconception that you'd like to see cleared up.
Yeah, so that's the misconception that if we talk about improving body appreciation, that a lot of people, and I don't like to use the obesity word, but a lot of people would say, aren't you promoting obesity if you're trying to promote body appreciation? And so what we're hearing very clearly from the data now is that making people feel bad about their bodies does not help them to maintain a lower weight or a weight in that 20 to 25 BMI range.
Kimberly's got a question. Any suggestions for health and PE teachers to teach about nutrition? Ours have been using food diaries. Yeah,
it's really challenging. And we are trying to come up with some new materials. I think for a while, people were afraid to talk about anything because they just didn't want to say the wrong thing. And I can appreciate that. What young people are telling us is that their nutrition education is so dry, and it's just like, here's the 5 food groups and here's the plate or the pyramid or whatever it is. And then so they're turning to things like Instagram or TikTok for nutrition information, but then that doesn't have the accuracy. And so I will have to, we've got some food resources on the Embrace Hub that are just more focused around enjoying food and thinking about what the most bang for buck is in terms of the food that you're eating and its nutritional content, and thinking about the way that eating different foods makes you feel, and sort of encouraging that feedback of thinking about thinking about what we're going to eat rather than coming at it from that, very rigid perspective, I guess.
Okay, and just quickly on this one, you mentioned it's more effective to deliver these programs to 13 and 14-year-olds. What would you suggest for 15 and 16-year-olds? And how would the messages on body positivity change?
Yeah, so I think it's the same key messages. And that's where I actually think that what we need to be doing is doing this every year and doing very similar things, but just increasing in terms of the developmental kind of level of detail that you can go into. The Body Project has got the highest amount of evidence around it in terms of being used with sort of adolescents 16 years, and particularly adolescents who already have higher risk for eating disorders. And so that is kind of a program that's done in like small groups and in a sort of not classroom setting, but maybe within the wellbeing program.
And just this very last question, distress was a word used on an earlier slide. Is it possible to have body image dissatisfaction without it creating distress and or negative behaviour?
Yeah, I think so. And it's actually, research is very bad at asking the sorts of questions that give us good prevalence data. And so I used the distress one because it was recent and because they've asked a question that gives prevalence data rather than the measures that we normally use.
Okay, I think we'll end it there. That's the last of our questions. Some thank yous coming in, and a thank you, Jodie and Zali, for sharing that experience and research with us. It's been really great. And Jodie, I know that we've been talking about this webinar, it seems like perhaps for a couple of years, but it surprised me to hear that it was 7 years that you've been doing that research. Congratulations and kudos to you for that.
Every single of those 7 years, I feel it.
Well, you look fabulous for it. We're going to send out a feedback email and a copy of the recording in the next couple of days. So for those of you still with us, look out for that in your inboxes. And we've got a couple of other webinars coming up this month. The first is from Madonna King next week on Monday, the 22nd of August, on her new book, L-Platers. And that's exploring the views of 17 and 18-year-old girls. And then on the 31st of August, another webinar that we've been waiting a long time to hold, and that's the legal implications of gender issues with educational lawyer David Ford. Both those events and many more are on our website, but that concludes today's webinar. So thanks again, Jodie and Zali. It was really great to have you with us, and best of luck with the next research project.
There will not be any. Thank you.
A well-deserved rest.
Yes.
Okay, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.